Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video we're going to be covering the new Fallout Commander pre-constructed deck, Mutant Menace. This is a Sultai Mutant deck focused on milling with radiation counters, and also pumping up your mutant army with +1/+1 counters. So in this video, we're going to be checking out all the brand new cards that have been previewed so far. The full deck list was supposed to be fully previewed by last night, but unfortunately some of the preview outlets did not actually show what cards they got, so we're still missing 11 cards. But regardless, I'm going to be showing all the other cards that we got, and it's a ton of cards, so don't worry about it. There's a lot of content to go through. And then we're going to briefly talk about the reprints, and spoiler alert, they're really good. But before we begin, a quick reminder that you can purchase these sweet new Precon decks over at our sponsor, cardgame.com/mtggoldfish. Alright, we begin with the face commander, the Wise Mothman. This is a 4-mana Sultai legendary creature, insect mutant. It's a 3/3 flyer, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. And rad counters are a new type of counter that has been introduced in the Fallout set. It's a radiation counter that says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards. For each non-land card milled this way, you lose 1 life and a rad counter. So let's say if you have 5 radiation counters on you, you're going to be eventually losing 5 life. 1 for each rad counter on you, and you're going to be milling some amount of cards, but we don't know how many cards you're going to end up milling, and we don't know how many turns it's going to take for you to lose all your radiation counters and therefore lose that much life. So radiation counters are very interesting to me. I really like this mechanic. They're incredibly useful as a self-mill deck because they're going to be milling you very reliably. However, they can also work as a way to finish off opponents because eventually you're going to lose life equal to the number of radiation counters on you. And as we'll see, this deck does a really good job of showcasing how flexible radiation is. We're going to be using radiation to lower our opponent's life totals, but we're also going to be radiating ourselves, and we're going to be utilizing that self-mill in a bunch of different ways. For example, our face commander says whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. Now this ability is like really strong because it doesn't just count you getting milled, it counts anybody getting milled at the table. So, you know, as stuff is getting milled, non-land cards are being milled, you get to put a bunch of counters on all your creatures. They get very, very big very, very quickly, and then you can proceed to kill the table. So the idea here is you put radiation counters on everybody, everybody's losing life, everybody's being milled, but guess what? Your mutant army is going to get huge way faster than everybody else, and then you can close out the game before the radiation could kill you. So just off the face commander alone, I think this is my favorite Precon deck. We'll see about the rest of the contents. And that's despite the fact that I actually am terrified of moths in real life. Like if there was a real life moth in my room right now, I would scream and run away. I'm fine with images of moths or whatever. But, you know, like, I'd rather it wasn't a Mothman leading the commander, but I like the mechanic so much that it's still my favorite deck. Alright, the next new card in the deck is Piper Wright, Public Reporter. This is a 2-mana blue, 1/2 legendary creature human detective. Whenever Piper deals combat damage to a player, investigate that many times. So Piper is just a 1/2, so if you deal combat damage with her without pumping her up or anything, you only get to investigate once. You make 1 clue token, which is actually a decent rate for a 2-drop, but if you grow her, then she can make a ton of clue tokens. If you can raise that power and deal more combat damage, you can make a ton of clue tokens, which is very exciting for a 2-drop. And then whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this card is actually just incredibly mana efficient for what it's doing. It could potentially generate a lot of clue tokens. Even just making 1 clue token per combat on a 2-drop is totally reasonable, especially attached with that triggered ability where you can start growing your creatures by sacrificing clues. And obviously if you put +1/+1 counters on Piper, then you can generate more clue tokens every single time you're attacking with her, and then therefore you could sacrifice more clues and grow your army even bigger. So it's a very good gameplay loop. I think Piper's really strong, and you could definitely build around her even more. If you pair her with Senator Peacock, for example, all your artifacts become clues in addition to their other types. So whenever you're sacrificing them, not only can you make Piper unblockable with Senator Peacock on the battlefield, but you can sacrifice like any artifact on the battlefield. Like, it could be like a bunch of random treasures or whatever, and then you could grow Piper or whatever other creatures very, very large, and then investigate and make a bunch more clues that way too. Obviously, if you have just a bunch of clues on the battlefield, you can start sacrificing them more mana efficiently with like Croclaw and Ironworks. You're actually mana positive. Instead of having to spend 2 mana to draw a card, you just sacrifice it and generate 2 mana. So there's a lot of ways of actually building around Piper. I think she'd be an actually kind of interesting commander. Mono blue is very limiting for what you want to be doing, obviously. However, she's even more exciting in the 99 of a bunch of artifact decks because she generates clues so efficiently. So I'm thinking like Lonus, for example, would absolutely love her. Maybe Brutaclad, a bunch of different shells for Piper would be really good. I'm really impressed by this card. Next, we've got Vexing Radgull. This is a 2-mana blue creature mutant bird. It's a 1/2 with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 rad counters if they don't have any rad counters. Otherwise, proliferate. So Vexing Radgull is pretty good as a engine piece for the deck with the Wise Mothman, for example, or any sort of deck that really cares about milling your opponents gradually, not at a high rate or anything. And it also, if somebody already has rad counters on it, then it basically acts as a thrumming bird. If you hit it, you can proliferate, so you can get a bunch of +1/+1 counters on your creatures if they already have counters on them. You can add more rad counters to all the players as well too. So it works double duty here. In decks that don't really care about milling your opponents, which is most decks, I would say, Thrumming Bird is just way better. However, in specific decks like this one, where you actually do want to put rad counters on everyone and have everybody milling, then Vexing Radgull is quite good. Next, we've got Feral Ghoul. This is a 3-mana black creature zombie mutant. It's a 2/2 with Menace. And it says, whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Feral Ghoul. And when Feral Ghoul dies, each opponent gets a number of rad counters equal to its power. Now, this zombie is incredibly exciting to me. It can grow very, very big in an aristocrat shell or a zombie deck shell, which are usually aristocrat style decks. And then when it dies finally, your opponents will get a ton of rad counters. Probably if like this is like a 10/10 or something, which is very reasonable to do in an aristocrats deck, and you sacrifice it, your opponent's getting 10 rad counters is going to be a significant amount of life loss. And then again in a deck like this that actually cares about milling everybody at the same time, it's even better. I think Feral Ghoul actually has potential to show up in a zombie deck, which is high praise indeed, because zombies have some of the best card quality and one of the largest card pools to work with, so there's really high competition for slots there. But Feral Ghoul is yet another way of comboing off with Gravecrawler and Phyrexian Altar. You can have Feral Ghoul, Gravecrawler, and Phyrexian Altar on the battlefield. You can sacrifice Gravecrawler infinite times to the Phyrexian Altar to grow Feral Ghoul infinitely large, and then you just sacrifice the Feral Ghoul to make infinite rad counters on all your opponents, and then they just die on their first main phase. So that's another way of just winning. Obviously, Gravecrawler and Phyrexian Altar have been comboing off since it ever got put in 2011. So this is just like yet another way of doing it. It's like playing combos with Paradox Engine, obviously, but it is a zombie. It fits the deck very well. It's something to consider. Next, we've got Hancock Ghoulish Mayor. This is a 3-mana black legendary creature, zombie mutant advisor. It's a 2/1, and each other creature you control that's a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on Hancock Ghoulish Mayor, and it also has Undying. So +1/+1 counters is a major theme of the deck. It's mostly +1/+1 counters and rad counters, and then ways of proliferating both those type of counters. So Hancock is going to have a lot of different ways of getting +1/+1 counters on it. Obviously, by itself, it has Undying, so if it would die with no counters on it, it will enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counter on it, and then start pumping up your zombie or mutant army. But from there, you can proliferate, you can add counters with the Wise Mothman, and you can grow your mutant army very, very big. So that's a really exciting lord. I don't think it's good enough in like a zombie deck, but it is very good in this particular deck, and it's going to be very good in mutant decks. since those care about +1/+1 counters. Next, we've got Harold and Bob, First Newmans. This is a 3-mana green legendary creature Treefolk Mutant. It's a 3/3 with Vigilance, Reach, and when Harold and Bob dies, if it was a creature, return to the battlefield. It's an aura enchantment with Enchant Forest you control, and Enchanted Forest has tap it, add 3 mana of any one color, you get 2 rad counters. And Harold and Bob lose all other abilities. So Harold's an interesting creature where you just really want it to die immediately, right? You want to have a forest on the battlefield, you want to play Harold, you want to sacrifice it as quickly as possible to enchant your forest, and then it's going to tap for 2 additional mana, which is really nice, and also mana fixes. And then you're going to be having a steady source of rad counters, which the deck is all about. It's all about milling to get extra value. So this is really, really nice in this particular deck. We haven't seen any sack outlets yet, I don't think, but if there are any in the deck, then this gets even better. And outside of this deck, I think this would be a slam dunk into DC Brood Tyrants or any sort of self-mill deck as well too, because these are only putting rad counters on yourself. So self-mill decks are going to be very interested in on it. Sidisi cares about creatures and self-mill, and Herald ticks both those boxes. It's a creature, so it can be milled with Sidisi and produce a zombie, and then when you play it, there's going to be plenty of sack outlets in a typical Sidisi deck, and then it's just a very steady source of milling, which is very nice. Next, we've got Rampaging Yao Guai. I have no idea how to pronounce it. South, please help me out if you're watching this. Okay, so the cost is X and triple green, and it's a creature mutant bear. It's a 2/2 with Vigilance Trample, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it enters the battlefield, destroy any number of target artifacts and or enchantments with total mana value X or less. So this card is a not so subtle answer to artifact tokens. We've seen very recently just the utter dominance of artifact tokens in Magic the Gathering. We've had full sets about food, clue, treasures, like years of this at this point. And now in Fallout, we have a bunch of junk tokens as well too. And this card is one of the most clean answers to that. For just 3 mana, you don't have to pay X. Just 3 mana, you put it on the battlefield, you can destroy all your opponent's clues, artifacts, junk, whatever. So that's incredibly efficient. Outside of that, if you want to start blowing up other things that aren't tokens that you have mana value higher than 0, it's not as efficient. Like if you want to just disenchant stuff, you're going to go for like a Nature's Claim for 1 mana, or you're just going to play like a Reclamation Sage for 3 mana. It's going to be very mana efficient to try and use this as a disenchant effect to start blowing up like 4 mana artifacts or something like that. However, if you just want to slam dunk this without caring about clue tokens and whatever, I think Magus Lucia Kane would love this card. It is an X spell, so it works very well with Magus. Magus is really good at ramping out the X spells too. She tasks for 2, and then you get 2 of them instead of just 1, which means double the value. Next, we have Raoul, Troubleshooter. Again, I don't know how to pronounce these names. This is a 3-mana Dimir, a legendary creature, zombie mutant rogue. It's a 1/4. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from among cards in your graveyard that were milled this turn, and you can tap it. Each player mills a card. So Raoul has a lot of synergy in this Precon deck. It mills, which the deck is all about. It turns your milling into card advantage. You get to cast 1 additional spell every single turn if things are working correctly. It's not flashy, it's not like super powerful or anything, and I'm not super excited to run it in other decks, but in the Precon, it works very, very well. It's a zombie mutant, so it synergizes with a lot of like the Mutant Matters cards and stuff. Yeah, it's a great player in the deck. Next, we've got Watchful Radstag. This is a 3-mana green creature elk mutant. It's a 2/2, and it has Evolve, which is a mechanic from the Simic Guild from I don't know how many years ago from Ravnica. It says whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And whenever Watchful Radstag evolves, create a token that's a copy of it. So if you play like a 3/1 or just a 3/3 or something like that, after Watchful Radstag, it will become a 3/3. It'll get a +1/+1 counter, and then it makes a copy of the base Watchful Radstag. So it puts a 2/2 on the battlefield with Evolve with the same card text, which will get out of hand very, very quickly. It's like the Squid Swarm dilemma. Now, this card is awesome. It's definitely a card that gets out of control very, very quickly if you don't deal with it immediately. It's like just like a Squid Swarm, honestly. And it's a mutant, and it cares about +1/+1 counters, so it works very well with the Precon. So this card is very cute, and I'm sure it's going to make a lot of people very, very happy in the casual crowd. Next, we've got Bloatfly Swarm. This is a 4-mana black creature insect mutant. It's a 0/0 with flying, but it enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's basically a 5/5. If damage would be dealt to Bloatfly Swarm while it has +1/+1 counters on it, prevent that damage, remove that many +1/+1 counters from it, then give each player a rad counter for each +1/+1 counter on it, removed this way. So this is an interesting card. Like, it works very well with the Precon. It's a 5/5 flyer, which is no slouch for 4 mana. And then eventually it just gives all people at the table 5 rad counters on it, or more if you add more +1/+1 counters through Proliferate or the Commander or whatever. So it's very good in this particular deck, but I don't think I would add it to any other decks outside of this Precon. Next up, we have Lily Bowen, Raging Grandma. This is a 4-mana green legendary creature, mutant warrior. It's a 0/0 vigilance, and it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Lily Bowen if its power is 16 or less. Otherwise, remove all but 1 +1/+1 counter from it. Then you gain 1 life for each +1/+1 counter removed this way. So Lily is an interesting card, but it's a very slow one. So the turn you play it, it's going to be a 2/2 vigilance, which is very bad for 4 mana. Then the next turn, turn 2, it will be a 4/4 with vigilance. Then turn 3, it will be 8/8. Then turn 4, it will be 16/16. And then turn 5, you're going to remove a bunch of +1/+1 counters and gain like 15 life. That's all well and good. Like, those are all effects that I really like, but the amount of turns that you have to be waiting for this to actually happen, it kind of sucks. You're going to need a lot of ways of adding counters to Lily Bowen or you know, expediting the process before it's very good. And to its credit, this Precon obviously does that. Our Commander, for example, can put a lot of counters on Lily and get that process a lot faster. And it provides a very particular important role in this deck too. Gaining life is actually important in this deck because we're throwing around rad counters left and right. So we're going to be losing life. Like, the self-mill is great for us, obviously, but we're going to be losing life, and we need some sources of life gain. So this is a nice on-theme way of gaining that life. However, it is very slow, and I wouldn't run it outside of this Precon. Next, we've got the Master Transcendent. This is a 4-mana Sultai legendary artifact creature mutant. It's a 2/4, and when the Master Transcendent enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. And you can tap it, put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3. So the Master is incredibly mana efficient reanimation, right? Like, you're stealing creatures from anybody's graveyard as they're getting milled, and it's a great payoff to all this rad counter shenanigans, all this mill shenanigans. The downside is you don't know what you're going to be getting, right? Sometimes you won't get anything on a turn because nobody's getting actually milled any creatures, and then you might get creatures that you don't really care to get. But the fact that you're just tapping it to reanimate and get something is incredibly good for a 4-drop. It's a really good payoff for this radiation theme, and also it works very well with the mutant theme. Next, we've got Young Deathclaws. This is a 4-mana Golgari creature lizard mutant. It's a 4/2 with Menace, and each creature card in your graveyard has Scavenge. The Scavenge cost is equal to its mana cost. Now, this is all right. I mean, being able to utilize the creatures in your graveyard, especially in a self-mill deck, is really, really good. You have only so many ways of getting back all those creatures, and this is another way to utilize them. And this deck also cares about +1/+1 counters, so Scavenge is another way of adding +1/+1 counters onto your creatures and then, like, further proliferating them and stuff. Scavenge is not very mana efficient 9 times out of 10 unless you have very particular creatures that have very high power and toughness but very low mana costs. And like, if you were building like a Verazal deck, you'd be full of these type of cards. But if you have a random card like Young Deathclaws in the 99, not so much. So it's okay. It's fine. It's kind of mana inefficient, but it does utilize the graveyard, so that's nice. Next, we've got Alpha Deathclaw. This is a 6-mana Golgari creature, lizard mutant. It's a 6/6 Menace Trample. And when it enters the battlefield or becomes monstrous, destroy target permanent. And it has 7 mana, 5 black and a green to monsterify 4. So 6 mana, ETB, blow up something. It could even be a land, which thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for letting us actually touch lands now and then. And you get a 6/6 Menace Trample. And then when you have 7 mana laying around, you can blow up something else and becomes a 10/10. This card is like not like super amazing or anything, but it's pretty good. Like it could blow up 2 things. It could actually get rid of lands, thank goodness. And it's a big beater, which is great. But I'm actually really excited about this card. This is one of the cards I'm most excited for in this Precon deck, despite me feeling pretty mid about it, because it is a 6-drop. And I actually have a 6-drop deck where every single non-land card in the deck has a mana value of exactly 6. It's led by Tasigur, the Golden Fang, and the companion is Garuda, Doom of Death, because why not? And this card is going to be a slam dunk in it because, you know, the card pool, the card selection for 6-drops, there's less competition. So Alpha Deathclaw is going to be the alpha of the pack here, and it's going to make its way into the 99. Next, we've got Agent Frank Horgan. This is a 7-mana Golgari, legendary creature, mutant warrior. It's an 8/6 with trample, and it has indestructible as long as it attacks this turn, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, proliferate twice. So Frank is a beast. It's 7 mana, which is a lot of mana, let's be honest. But it is an 8/6 trampler. It has indestructible on your turn, so it works very well with like board wipes or whatever. So like you could attack, and then post combat you could just raft the board, and then you just have the agent on the battlefield, which is pretty awesome. And the double proliferate on enter the battlefield and attacking is actually just really strong. Like it works really well with this deck, obviously. But you know, if you run an infect deck or something like that, double proliferating on ETB and attack is really good. Like if you throw Lightning Greaves on Agent Frank and you can cast him and then immediately attack with him, you've proliferated 4 times, and that makes the mana cost actually worthwhile. Like it's a lot, but you're also in black, so you could throw this in as a reanimation target in some sort of decks. And yeah, if you really want proliferate, this is a good source of it, despite, you know, the high mana cost. Next, we've got the first ever Sloth, maybe? I think, or official one. This is Lumbering Mega Sloth. This is a 12 mana green creature. Sloth mutant. It's an 8/8, but it costs 1 less to cast for each counter among players and permanents. So you can cast it for as little as 2 green mana, which is nice. And it has trample, and it enters the battlefield tapped. So this is a nice big beater that you're probably going to be casting for like 4 to maybe even 2 mana in the Precon pretty reliably. But at the end of the day, it's just an 8/8 trampler. It doesn't really do anything else for you. So it's good in the deck. It's a mutant and all that stuff, but I wouldn't run it anywhere else. Next, we've got Nuclear Fallout, which was also in another deck too. I think it was in Hail Caesar. It's X and double black for a sorcery that says each creature gets twice -X, -X until end of turn. Each player gets X rad counters. So this is a great way to wipe the board, but then also throw a bunch of rad counters on everybody and then start getting the mill train going and having fun times with synergies and all that stuff. I think this card is actually a very good board wipe, and it works very well in basically any self-mill deck. So I'm probably going to try it out into Shiro. Sidisi already mentioned before too. I think these are all really nice homes for it, and like, yeah, I think it's a pretty solid card. Next, we've got one of the strongest cards in the Precon, in my opinion. This is Mutational Advantage. This is a 3-mana Simic instant that says permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn, and then you proliferate. So this is just like protection for all your stuff with counters on them. This doesn't have to just be creatures, though. It can also be like planeswalkers or any other type of permanents that happen to have counters on them. They can all survive, and that's pretty sweet. And then on top of that, you get to also proliferate. So this card is going to be really good in a bunch of decks that care about counters. So for example, one of the latest Precons that came out, Hackball of the Surging Soul, is a Merfolk deck that just very easily just floods the board with +1/+1 counters. This is going to be yet another way of just protecting your board of Merfolk while also advancing your board state by, adding additional counters on everything. And then if you're in a Planeswalker deck, well, this is a great way to fog oncoming attacks. Like if people are going to be attacking your Planeswalkers for lethal, you can cast this and then also proliferate. So you get even a loyalty counter on all your Planeswalkers as well too. Yeah, the flexibility here is really, really good. 3 mana for its ability is very strong. And yeah, it's going to be a slam dunk in any deck that it just likes flooding the board with any sort of counters. Next, we've got Atomize. This is a 4-mana Golgari instant that says destroy target non-land permanent, and then you proliferate. So this is short and sweet. It's a very flexible removal spell at instant speed. Generally speaking, this sort of effect would cost, 3 mana, but you're paying an additional mana to proliferate. So in decks that really care about proliferating, this is a pretty nice option. So I'm thinking like Atraxa, maybe even Super Friends. Yeah, it would be a worthwhile inclusion. It's a good removal spell, but like 4 mana is a lot for this effect. So if you really like proliferating, then this card is good. Otherwise, I don't know. It's borderline for me, honestly. Next, we've got one of my favorite cards from the Precon, Radstorm. This is 4 mana blue instant, and it's very simple. Storm, proliferate, which is great. So if you cast it by itself, it sucks. You're just going to proliferate once, whatever. However, if you cast any other spell, or if anybody else casts a spell, remember, this is instant speed, so you can do this on an opponent's turn. If anybody else casts a spell, you get to proliferate twice at instant speed, which is already kind of worth it for 4 mana. And then if a bunch of spells were cast beforehand, you get to proliferate a whole bunch, and yeah, that feels really good at instant speed. That's definitely worth 4 mana. I'm like super excited for this because I have a draw new infect deck, and yeah, I'm that guy. So I'm going to be putting some poison counters on everybody, and then at instant speed, I can just like, oh, you're just all dead, like you casted 5 spells on your turn, or like somebody casted a spell and then I casted a spell and then I just respond with Radstorm. Everybody gets like 5 poison counters at instant speed, and it's also hard to counter it too because it's like 5 instances of the same spell going on the stack. Woo. Oh yeah, I like this card. As a dirty infect player, oh yeah, I'm excited for this one. Next, we've got Nuka Nuke Launcher. This is a 2-mana colorless artifact equipment. It says, equipped creature gets +3/+0 and has Intimidate. Whenever equipped creature attacks until end of defending player's next turn, that player gets 2 rad counters whenever they cast a spell and has equipped 3. So this equipment is definitely unique. I like the idea of like punishing opponents for casting multiple spells on their next turn. That's kind of cute. But overall, I'm not super sold on this card. I feel like all the parts that it's doing are kind of cool, but not for the cost that is associated to it for like the equip 3. Maybe it was like equip 1. But yeah, it's okay in the Precon, but I wouldn't really recommend it anywhere else. Next, we have Power Fist. This is a 2-mana green artifact equipment. It says equipped creature has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it, and has equipped 2. Now, this card I actually like. It doubles +1/+1 counters on the equipped creature, and this deck is all about +1/+1 counters on your mutants and everything like that. So I think it's pretty mana efficient on how it's doubling everything. You just need a 4 mana investment, and then it starts doubling +1/+1 counters on the creature each time it's dealing combat damage. And the trample is also nice too. I think outside of the Precon though, I'm just really gonna just keep shouting at my boy Skullbriar. Like, it's not the best Voltron deck, far from it. It's like the fairest Voltron deck you'll ever see, but it's +1/+1 counters. It works well. Skullbriar, I gotta shout it out, my boy. But yeah, moving on. We have Strength Bobblehead. So the bobbleheads, they're all 3-mana colorless artifacts that tap to add 1 mana of any color, and they all have an activated ability that scales up with the number of bobbleheads you control. This one is you pay 3, tap it, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, where X is the number of bobbleheads you control, activate only as a sorcery. So for 4 mana, you get to put 1 +1/+1 counter on target creature, which is awful. If you had a lot of bobbleheads on the battlefield, then this would be maybe mana efficient to do so. But there's only 1 bobblehead in the entire Precon. Spoiler. So this card is like very bad in this Precon. Either you add a lot more bobbleheads to the deck, which I wouldn't recommend, but I much more just recommend just replacing this card with anything. Next, we've got Recon Craft Theta. This is a 4-mana artifact vehicle. It's a 4/4 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 blue alien creature token, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever it attacks, proliferate, and has crew 2. So this one's pretty straightforward. It's a 4-mana vehicle, crew 2 thrumming bird, which doesn't sound great when I'm saying it out loud. Like, it's fine. Like, it's fine. If you really, really need proliferate, then this is an okay way of doing so. But we have way better options of proliferating, I think. And at 4 mana, I kind of wish maybe it proliferated twice when it attacked. I don't know. Moving on, we have Struggle for Project Purity. This is a 4-mana blue enchantment that says, as it enters the battlefield, choose Brotherhood or Enclave. Brotherhood says, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent draws a card. You draw a card for each card drawn this way. Or Enclave, whenever a player attacks you with one or more creatures, that player gets twice that many rad counters. Now, this is a cute enchantment. It's flexible. It either is drawing you cards, but well, you and your opponents, which kind of sucks, or it's a pillow fort card, which also kind of sucks because I don't think rad counters are really that much of a deterrent for your opponents attacking you, honestly. Like, unless they have an irrational fear of milling, sometimes if your opponents are just like graveyard decks, they'll want to attack you because then they get rad counters and then they get to do their graveyard stuff much easier. So you're kind of helping them out in that sense too. So either way, I don't think it's like that much of a deterrent. And I don't think it's really good card draw either, because like you'll draw 3 cards if you have 3 opponents, but each opponent is also drawing a card. So you're not really up cards compared to your opponents, and you're the one who just spent 4 mana and a card to play this card, right? So, yeah, I don't like either side of these. I don't like them in the Precon. Like, obviously, rad counters are kind of cool in the Precon, but yeah, I think it's kind of a weak card regardless, even in the best case scenario. Next up, we've got Vault 87, Forced Evolution. This is a 5-mana Simic saga with 3 chapters. Chapter 1, gain control of target non-mutant creature for as long as you control Vault 87. Chapter 2, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It becomes a mutant in addition to its other types. And then Chapter 3, draw a card equal to the greatest power among mutants you control. So this is a pretty okay saga. You get to steal your opponent's best creature for like, what, 3 turns? 2 turns? Which is kind of okay. And then chapter 2 is like, whatever. You have to put a +1/+1 counter on something and make it a mutant. And then chapter 3 can be very good. It could draw you like 5, 6 cards. If you have like Frank on the battlefield, you draw 8 cards. You know, that's pretty good. And you only have to wait 2 turns to do that. So overall, you know, kind of worth the 5 mana. I'm not super excited about this card because it's kind of slow. But that's, you know, basically all sagas. But I really do like chapter 1 and chapter 3. Just stealing something for 2 turns that is like the big #1 threat at the battlefield. You could probably, on the second turn, you could probably tell somebody maybe block with a bigger creature so you can eliminate it. So that's like a roundabout way of actually dealing with something permanently. And then eventually you do draw a bunch of cards as well too. However, like the card draw and stuff, that's not guaranteed, right? Like if somebody board wipes you right before chapter 3 kicks in, you're going to be really sad because it's going to do nothing. And that's definitely happened to me a lot with different types of sagas where you have to have some stuff on the battlefield, but then your board gets wiped and then the chapter dings that you're super excited for and nothing actually happens. So I don't know. That's something to keep in mind for sagas. I'm not super hot on this card. Next, we've got Vault 12, the Necropolis. This is a 6-mana black saga. It has 3 chapters. First chapter, each player gets 3 rad counters. Chapter 2, create X 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens, where X is the total number of rad counters among players. And then chapter 3, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature controlled that's a zombie or mutant. Now, this is 6 mana, and like all sagas, they're kind of slow and telegraphed, and they could go wrong. However, chapter 2 can make a lot of zombies. That could be a lot of zombies, especially in like a rad counter deck like this one. Like if everybody has, what, 5 rad counters on them by the time chapter 2 starts ticking, you make 20 zombies that are 2/2s, and they're not tapped. They enter the battlefield untapped, which is nice. And then if nobody has a board wipe, chapter 3, you start growing them and then just start smashing face. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think this one's going to be pretty good in this Precon. The final new cards are lands. We got Mariposa Military Base. It's a land that says you can have it into the battlefield tapped. If you do, you gain 2 rad counters. It taps for colorless, and you could pay 5 mana, tap it, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each rad counter you have. So if you have a bunch of rad counters, if you have 5 or more rad counters when you have this untapped, you can just tap it, draw a card. So essentially 1 mana, draw a card, which is very, very good. How easily will you be up to 5 or more rad counters every single turn that you want to activate this ability? I don't know. I have to play the Precon to figure that out. But if it is very consistent that you have that many rad counters on you, this card can be really, really good. It does tap for colorless, and this is a 3-color deck, so that is a little bit of an issue. But, you know, it can enter the battlefield untapped if you don't need rad counters. And if you also don't need the mana the turn you play it, getting 2 rad counters is actually really, really sweet. And then, yeah, just being able to draw cards very mana efficiently afterwards when you don't need the mana is really good. I like this card. It's really, really strong in the Precon. And then finally, we got 2 new lands. They're just completing the cycle of, I don't know how you would call it, Signet lands? I think they're called Signet lands. Overflowing Basin and Viridescent Bog. So yeah, they're just Signet lands. They're okay. They're fine budget inclusions. They're not super hype or anything, but they do the job pretty well for mana fixing and whatnot. All right, so those were all the brand new cards that we've seen so far, at least, of the deck list. Like I said, there were 11 cards that were supposed to be revealed last night, but whoever got them, they just dropped the ball and didn't, you know, reveal them in time. So we're going to have them show up in the official image gallery from Wizards of the Coast later today. But let's talk about the reprints for now. The reprints are actually quite good, especially in comparison to the last 2 Precons that I looked at. We have some big bangers. Branching Evolution, $11. Guardian Project, $10. Inexorable Tide, $10. And then Hardened Scales, like there's a big drop off. Hardened Scales, it's not popping up the price over here, but it's $2. But yeah, just in 3 cards, that's like $31 worth of value in 3 cards, which is really, really nice. And then there's a big drop off after there, but like the rest of the reprints are very, very good. They just don't happen to be that expensive. And yeah, that's the full deck list minus the ones that weren't revealed yet. I would say this deck is really, really sweet. Like, out of the 3 that I've seen so far, this is by far my favorite. I really love the idea of rad counters. I like the idea of mill decks that are utilizing like incremental mill for value. And I like a lot of the new cards, and I like a lot of the reprints. So yeah, really good job, Wizards of the Coast. I'm super hype about this, despite not caring at all about the Fallout franchise. So I'm sure if you are a big Fallout fan, you're going to love this even more. All right, that's it for now. We have one more Precon that's going to be previewed throughout today, and it's going to be fully previewed, hopefully, fingers crossed, tonight. And then the following morning, I will be covering that full deck list, and I will be including the 11 cards that were not revealed in time for Mutant Menace as well, too. So be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss any of the upcoming videos, and I'll be back soon with the next one. So until then, friends, see ya!